Welcome back, guys, to the fitness podcast. This time I talked when the lady was talking, so it's all good. And shout out to everyone who has obviously bought our crisp, was it crisp audio link? Not bought it, but like use the link. Go check it out. It's in the bio, show notes, whatever it is. Make use of it as well. And they're our latest sponsor as well. By the way, I may get a sponsorship, by the way, with Insight Subs. So fingers crossed, maybe using that next couple of weeks. KMAC 10.
Yeah, that's big news.
I've been the same league as TM Cycles and Bridgman and boys. So thank you, Lord. Appreciate that. We'll keep you guys posted on this. But this week we're back, and we wanted to go back on gender roles part 2 with a slight twist. We're going to talk also about the Asian community, because obviously we've seen, differences over the last, probably I've seen obviously a lot of differences over the last like 20, 30 years as well. Starting from cooking to jobs, to be honest, and everything that's going on around that. So, Nate, you had a big post today about what you've seen amongst Asian men over the last, like, say, you've been coaching probably the last 10 years, and you obviously work with Asians all the time. You made that post. Do you want to talk about that post first, and then I can talk about my own experience as well.
Yeah, so I'm in the business now of like just speaking bare facts, not only messing. But basically, my goal. I posted something today that went out. That was about how Asian dudes don't know how to cook. They don't cook, and therefore it's a large predicting factor on why they're not in shape. It really stemmed back from a couple of weeks ago. I was with a client for dinner, and he was telling me, a client's husband was with me, and he was basically telling me about how he's not in shape because of he's so busy and and like all these reasonable excuses that are just excuses that he just doesn't want to get in shape. But it made me think, because he was speaking about how who cooks dinner and how that goes around. Monica always cooks dinner. She always does this, that, and the other. And I was thinking, how many times over the last 10 years have I seen or had to convince guys to take the reins of the cooking from their mum or their wife or their whoever else, because it's just not them, cooking, to the point of where then they do this and then they start actually getting in shape. And we've spoke about this before, haven't we, when we were on our trips to America? We're like, you've been quite lucky-ish to get into fitness early, because then you started cooking your own foods, right? Compared to what your mum was giving you or whatnot. And it's a massive, massive thing, because ultimately, if you don't know what's going in your body, you don't know what you're eating, and you're just getting given stuff by your parents or by your wife. If they don't actually have a clue, which 90% don't, they just think healthy is you being quite chubby and chunky and happy, then happy is different than being in shape, because you can be happy with 10 rotis and eating that every single day, but can you really be in shape whilst your mum's trying to feed you the way she wants to, right? So go on that.
Yeah, so it started for me, like, I realized at the age of like 15, 16, I was like, I need to take control. Otherwise, it's a lot harder for like me to tell my mom at that point, telling her like, you need to cook differently from me, and you need to cook it this way, that way, because they're also in a system where it's like, it's not broken at all for them at all. Until you get like something that's going on in like a disease or anything like that, then you're like, okay, I need to think about it. But what do we first resort to is medication, right? Straight away, we're like, no, this medication will solve my issue. So for me, I realized, why don't I get involved with my own cooking and change my own cooking? And say, okay, look, why don't I just start by making small differences for my breakfast instead of having just the odd cereal, which is not, there's no resistance to it, right? It's just you pour it and put milk and done. So I was like, when I start making eggs and stuff, but I know people to this day, some Asian guys never made like eggs, to be honest, like, whether it's scrambled, whether it's, omelet, whatever it is, they've never done it. So I, at a young age, decided, okay, you know what, why don't I get involved in this? Because I think it's only going to help me in my own journey, because I know I'm now I have control of this. Whereas, we've seen it both for us, we've seen Asians historically, and guys who've also like signed up and said, look, I want to get a transformation. They're like, I had a conversation yesterday with a guy who goes, well, I don't cook. And I was like, at all? Anything? And he's like, yeah, not really. Obviously the wife cooks now, and you grow up kind of pampered in a way. We used to have this deep conversations around this in the States, Nate, about, why is this the case? But, we spoke about gender roles last week. It was that, like, the woman in the house would cook. And sometimes the woman is quite protective over her cooking anyway. Like, it's very much like, no, you don't never step into the kitchen. And I've seen this in like even Italian culture, quite a lot, the Latin culture. You know, I've seen it, like it's weird in this kind. I don't know what it is about like Latin, Indian, Italian culture. They're very much like very protective. The woman's always very protective of their cooking, and the guy usually doesn't get involved. We just kind of, you go eat. So I decided, yeah, when I was about 16, 17, and then I kind of went off to uni, and that kind of gave me a lot more control over my own environment and my own, like, uni can go one or two ways for most people, right? It goes, you know, you either go into that whole drinking culture and then you gain 15 kilos, or you end up changing your life, which is what I did. And I realized for me, it was the best choice. And again, it propelled my own kind of understanding of nutrition, but also allowed me to be in this career right now. Otherwise, I think I would have been, you know, I've known PTs who don't even cook themselves sometimes, and they're like, I don't know what to do with macros and stuff like that. Like, I have actually legit worked with PTs before. They're like, because they've never given any nutrition plans to anyone, right? So it's just very much like, I just train people and then I eat whatever I want as well. So I've seen it even in that situation where they've never had control. But yeah, I decided at an early age for myself, it was the best decision. And then when I've had clients who've been in the same boat, I've kind of said to them, you need to take control like now, otherwise you're always going to struggle. Because there's so much portion control size, you can do all that kind of stuff, but is it really going to help you in the long term? Like, it could help you a bit, like a good 5-10%, in my opinion, for sure. But is it going to really propel you to the results you really want? And the answer to that for me is probably not really.
Yeah, I think the process that happens, and I feel like this is always back to this quote that I always say, is that we have to respect social norms. And social norms will dictate and drive the way that we act and the way that we are responsible on a day-to-day basis. You know, in the bottom of that quote, or the bottom of that post, I put, if you learn how to cook for the next 6 months and then went back to your mum and dad's cooking or your wife's cooking after that, that's absolutely fine. But because of that lesson that you've learned for 6 months, you're able to portion size things better. You're able to put things in perspective a little bit better, and you probably reduce those portion sizes. You probably don't need as much as what you think you do, and therefore you get this this objectivity of like, this is what I need, not what I've been given. And that always comes down to conditioning, right? Because as I say, if you go into a restaurant, 100 people go into a restaurant, who's picking the portion sizes that's right for the individual? The fucking restaurant. They pick how much they want to give versus how much you should really eat. You know, if you go to Regency, the portion sizes are going to be technically for people that want to go to Regency, right? They're the Indians that are loving Indian food, that is great tasting, but their portion sizes are massive when you're looking at, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to give you more food. They're trying to give you large quantities. They want you to go back. It's like the element of share bag Doritos for like white dudes like me. Share bag Doritos aren't made for sharing. They're made for you to consume more so that you buy more. And the same way that share bags of minstrels aren't made for sharing. Who shares a fucking bag of minstrels? Like, you will eat them to eat more. That's why what happened is that they created a share bag. They reduced the sizes, that the amount of crisps that were in the normal packs, so that you were just like, oh well, I might as well just buy the share bag. Share bag's more expensive. It's a better cost for them, and the more times you eat it, like the HelloFresh boxes. When I was dating the COO of the HelloFresh boxes, she said to me, if we get people past the 4 to 5 month marker of buying these boxes, so around about 17, 18 boxes, we'll keep you for a year. So when you go to these share bags of Doritos, they're not trying to get you to a point where they're eating for you. They're actually giving you a large quantity so that you make it a staple within your home, which is different to what you really need. So if you become conditioned to having the size of the share bag Doritos as a bag of crisp, you know, that's the conditioning. I remember there was a guy at school as well. This is a bit tangent, but I had a guy at school called Mike Hoddy, and basically his name rhymed with, you know, Waddish, because that's what he did. He waddled, and he used to eat a pack of crisps like he was drinking a bottle of water. So he'd open the packs of crisps up and he'd hold it with one hand and he'd turn it upside down, and like, that was conditioning for him. He thought that was usual because his mum and dad bagged 4 bags of crisps on a day-to-day basis. Now, bring it back to the Asian market and Asian cuisine, is that if you're given a plate by your mum, it's not based on what you need physiologically. It's based on what she thinks she should give you, based on what she believes is the right portion. And if we know that, we spoke about how they choose medication over maintenance or balance,
they will choose it based on what will make them feel happy that their kids are eating. And in their mind, there's a conditioning part to that too. So, let's say, for example, my mum and dad would portion my food out, and they would portion it based on what they got from their mum and dad, that their portion sizes, and then their portion sizes before that, and family on family on family, not physiological issues or physiological benefits. So when they come to the point where you're not eating the food that you're supposed to be eating, you're eating what someone else gives you, and that's always going to be a conflict when trying to stay in shape, because you have no control. You don't know what 55 grams of rice looks like. You don't know what 100 grams of rice looks like. You don't know what's right for you. You just know what's been given to you, and that is the conditioning that you get. And that's why when you don't cook your own food, you don't take responsibility, you don't spend the level of curiosity and interest in, actually, is this right for me, or is it just being given to me? That's the fucking issue, right?
Yeah, and for most people, historically, it's always been like, it's lunch, it's dinner. Back in the day in Africa, right? This is how it'd be. It would be breakfast, then you'd get a full lunch, which would look like dinner. So imagine having all the curry, the chapatis and stuff like that. You'd get it for lunch, and then you'd get it again for dinner. So you have 3 meals, but there would be like at least 4,000 calories quite easily. And that's what most people grew up on, right? But then you move to, let's say, England or the States, lunch would kind of it wouldn't be the same anymore, because we talk about, now it's changed. Like, obviously, women are not just at home, especially Asian women are not just at home and like, I'm going to be cooking for the rest of the day, and that's really it. Like, historically, that's how it used to be. So now the lunches have changed, but the dinner usually still stays the same. It's going to be the curry dish or whatever. What I've seen, I'll give major credit to the Asian population now that's changing. The ones who are especially trying to change, a lot of them have now kind of said, okay, you know what, I'm gonna try and attempt to cook this. I'm gonna attempt to do this now. And I work with more people now who, and Nate, you've probably done the same thing, especially back in the day, where people who said, I can't cook, and then they make a decision, say, actually, you know what, I'm gonna take control, because first couple of weeks they use their mom's cooking or whatever, and then the mom's obviously not portion controlling for them. Is like, hey, eat this because it's healthy now, because it's in your meal plan. And then they've added in a shit ton of olive oil or whatever, and then suddenly they're like, I'm not losing any weight, what's going on? Then they make a conscious decision saying, actually, you know what, I'm going to take control now. And that's when they really flip their whole lifestyle around. And that's when they become so curious about like cooking and so on. So what happened to me, really and truly, because I was like, I know my mom's not going to, like, instead of using the 1 cal spray, she's going to go ahead and use olive oil instead for eggs easily. So why am I going to make that decision? Say, you know what, still make those eggs. It delays the process, delays the results. But like I said, I give them a lot of credit now, because a lot of, like, over the last at least 5 years, I've seen major changes, and like guys especially who've come in and said, I've never made food before for myself, etc. To 6 months down the line, they're like posting recipes, and they're like, oh, I made this, I made that. So I think the shift is definitely going in the right direction, but I still think there needs to be probably more education, but also more understanding amongst everyone else. Like, again, the older generation are the ones who probably will still be more protective over like what's going on, right? They'll be like, no, you're going to have this, I'm going to cook this for you, etc. And it's a whole social stigmas that come into it as well, right? Which you spoke about, social norms and so on.
And how's it been in the kitchen for you?
Well, right now it's quite interesting, because obviously it's very few food sources, but bringing it back to the Western, it's kind of similar though. Like I grew up eating a lot of what do you call it when you eat half-made food already, like ready-made kind of thing.
Ready-made meals.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up eating, at least we call it like half ready meal that you actually cook, but it's and so I grew up on that type of diet. It was I didn't learn how to cook until I was 25. But for the same reason, I got curious and I wanted to take responsibility. And I said that, well, I can't just sit and say I can't cook and actually not try and change it. And I live with 2 girls who are actually really good chefs or cooks. So I picked up a few things from them in how to do seasoning. And then I started to change the recipes a little bit. And I mean, little by little, you do learn, because your conditioning, you're rewiring your conditioning. And so but I think the beautiful thing about the Indian culture is that a lot of things is homemade, even though it might not be necessarily healthy. Whereas we come over to this part of the world, a lot of time it's actually not homemade, it's partially made. So there's been, I guess, issues in different ways growing up in this side of the world with this type of culture. Where everything has to be super quick. I mean, if dinner wasn't ready in 10 minutes, it wasn't, then you probably just have a sandwich because no one had time to cook. So, yeah, there's definitely been, even, going away from the Indian culture, but I think it's the same in the Western industry, like where the conditioning happens all the time. And I was definitely part of that type of conditioning. I used to say, I hate cooking, I don't know how to cook. So to see that transformation and go, actually, I love cooking and I know how to cook, that's quite a bit of a badge to put on yourself and go like, actually, I'm happy to invite friends over for dinner because I know I can cook now. And I know that I can cook it in a way that it serves me as well. I don't have to go for the mac and cheese because I don't know how to cook anything else. Therefore, I can take control over having friends over for dinner, and it still would be a good meal and a healthy meal, which makes it a difference long term, right? So yeah, conditioning has happened everywhere, just slightly different.
Yeah, mac and cheese reminds me of Thanksgiving. Back in 2019, I remember having that. But Nate, what about your own experience as well? Because obviously, like, there is going to be a level of conditioning now you also had probably from your parents. How did it influence you, and what changes did you need to make? Because all of us have to make some sort of change anyway, right? Regardless on our transformation journey. So what changes did you make, let's say at the age of like from 16 onwards?
Yeah, so mine was like, I got into cooking because I had to, because my dad was like, if you want to cook differently to the family, you're gonna cook your own fucking food. And like, they were quite protective, as with everybody. Everyone's parents are protective over that. That becomes something where they see it as their right and role and responsibility to actually feed you and nourish you until you're able to look after yourself. So for me, until that point, I was going off what my family norms were, which is totally normal. But they got me fat, so it was particularly useful for the goals that I had. I mean, the social norms around the meals were absolutely fine. If I look back, and I said this a few times, my mum and dad's meals that they gave me were actually really calorie okay and actually decent. It was just the other habits around biscuits and treats on the other side of it that really screwed me up. Being able to do that, but when I really took control, or started to take control, when I got forced to by wanting to do a certain diet. And then when I started the dieting process, that's when I really started to take ownership of that. Now, it's really important to know that I didn't become a good cook until probably 2 years ago. So it took me like 10 years to get to a point where I could make decent meals. I was only doing diet food, so I was doing like, stir fries with chicken, or microwavable pack of rice with tuna on top with barbecue sauce. I was making eggs. I was making yogurt and berries, like nothing major. I wasn't whipping up a storm. And like being able to then take a transition to like Emily, exactly what Emily did, which is where I can now bring people around and do one or two good dishes if I want to. It is part of that parcel now when it comes to what I can offer. But I think it's really important for people to know that the element of culinary design, or like whipping up a storm in the kitchen, as it is commonly known, is it takes such a long time, and you will make shit food first. So you make this transition, you're like, okay, what my parents are giving me aren't serving me, or you're forced to make the decisions and make your own food because your parents are like, fuck that, if I'm not making 2 meals in a day, there's too much washing up, da 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 da, then you're going to make some absolute stinkers. You're going to make some absolute stinking meals where you're like, oh my gosh, I realized that this is something I've missed out on such a long time. One of the first time I ever cooked like a chicken curry, I think I gave myself food poisoning because I didn't know how to cook chicken properly. And then I slowly learned that I was either going to be a vegetarian, because that reduces the ability to be killed by food poisoning, or I was going to actually start learning how to make decent food. So I got myself a Foreman grill when they were a popular thing, and started cooking up, fresh chicken on a Foreman with some seasoning and stuff like that. So it was that really good education from that age onwards. But it doesn't happen with everybody. And like I know, like you said, there's people that are now 30, 35 that go to work, get a plate delivered to them on that table when they get in, and they have no clue what's on it.
Yeah.
Don't you think as well, it comes back to also presence, right? Because you can whip up a meal and you can have had a meal, without being present when you ate it. So you actually don't, if you were to get curious, actually, this was really nice. What was in this? And you get the seasoning and you get whatever ingredients been in, you can actually start to replicate that. But because most people are not present when they eat, they just shove it down and go, well, that was a nice meal. Or you cooked a meal and it's like, actually, this one I made really nice. Make a mental note of how you did it, what ingredients you used, or the order you put it in, or how long you cooked it for, at what temperature you cooked it on. And all of a sudden, it's like you just need to replicate what you just did. And all of a sudden, you're starting to do a reconditioning of that particular meal, and then you do it with something else, and then you do it with something else. Once you've learned how to cook one hard-boiled egg and you know how many minutes, you can always do a hard-boiled egg. So it's that simple, but it's lack of presence in doing something and like paying attention to what you actually do that also makes the journey a lot longer for you to get there because you're not paying attention.
But it is like what you said about meal hygiene there is actually really, really important because a lot of them, like, because they get to play in the food, they don't really think about it. And you, like I said, they're not present. And a lot of them eat very, very quickly again. Like it's very much like 5 minutes done. It could have another meeting. Imagine if they, like, I can remember back in the day vividly, my uncles would have their food because it would be our lunch break. They'd come home. They would be like other side of like Nairobi. They'd come home and within 20 minutes, they have to leave again. So imagine they have to eat. The maid would whip up the rotis like so quick. It was like a machine, and they would eat quick, gone. I'm like, how do you digest? Me thinking about it now, I'm thinking, how do they digest their food? I can imagine how many digestive problems they must have had. And then on top of that, you again, like 6 hours later, it's like, what the hell's going on? Back then there was no such thing as snacking. I mean, the only snacks you may have had were maybe were like the odd, peanuts here and there, but that was really it. But they had no snacks. That's the only probably thing that was good compared to, obviously, if you think about the Western culture now, you can go to, like, you can walk down and you see Tesco's. Oh, let me walk in Tesco's. You see whatever's there, and you're like, let me get this chocolate bar. Back then you just didn't have that, so you kind of overfed yourself to compensate for that, in my opinion. But like I said, it's similar to like I'm watching, like I watch like obviously a lot of Italian mob shows and stuff like that, and I see a lot with that as well, like Sopranos, where it's always like the guy just sat there, like Tony's just sat there, he's like this, and he gets another like plate. Even like as soon as it comes down, he's like, oh, do you want to eat this? Do you want to? And it's still the same in even Italian culture, which is interesting to see this. And I'm always trying to figure out, like, why is Italian culture very similar? How you look at like Nigerian, Ghanaians, they're very, very, very similar as well. A lot of Nigerian guys, like I remember going to uni, there was literally loads of guys, like Nigerian guys that we were like chilling with, playing FIFA with. They're like, yeah, we just started learning how to cook recently. It was because they're at uni, right? Because it forces you to be in a different environment where your mom's not also going to be there. So I think uni can actually change a lot of, like, I'm seeing a lot of youngsters now, they're changing a lot because of uni, because they have to cook. But I look at my brother, he didn't really cook that much either at uni. He used his flatmate to make food for him, which was, I was like, well, fair enough. But at the same time, you're not learning anything. And now he still struggles. Like my mom would still be like, oh, do you want to eat this? And he's like, yeah, fine. But he still wants to gain muscle mass. He wants to go gym. And I'm like, you probably eat less than 8 grams a day just from like our mom cooking food right now. Yeah. So I can see that happening. Like you can see two different people, same household, but the conditioning, like how I had to force myself to change purely because I wanted to change. My brother's kind of content. He's like, he's not getting overly fat, but he's also not really growing either. So he's kind of in that in between, but he's going to get skinny fat as he goes on and on and on in his days. He's going to be like, oh, I look like crap now. And I've seen that with my cousin, like he grew up like super skinny. And then as he's grown older and older, he just got softer and softer and softer. And they're the ones who look the worst typically, right? They're the ones who start transformation at like 40. And I'm like, I transform my physique. And then they're the ones when they cut, they're like 56 kilos when they cut because they've never gone anywhere. They don't have enough protein either. That's another subject in itself, right? We've been talking about protein in Indian culture for years, me and Nate, to be fair. That's another one. But yeah, what are you gonna say, Em?
No, I was just gonna say amen, because I it's the same conversations I have with my fair share. But I was going to say something earlier. I remember one time when me and Nate went to a restaurant, and this was like the first time when I knew that he started to make an effort on mealtime hygiene, because he would literally, I don't know where we were. We were probably having a massive feast. Maybe it's that time when you took me out to that restaurant and we ended up going for that fucking plate that was so ginormous, and we were literally scared that we would die. And he would literally like eat a little bite and he would put his cutlery down and I was like gobbling and I was like, oh. And it just clicked to me like, oh, okay. So then I started eating slower, and I just thought it was such a funny time because that like really highlighted what a fucking monster I am when I'm eating. And he was like, no, I'm just doing this new thing. I'm just putting down my cutlery between every bite.
Be a
to
fork
slow
diet.
down." Yeah, and he was like chewing. It was funny. I just remember it so vividly. It was funny. So,
What year was that?
huh?
What year was that?
2017 maybe? 16, 17?
Went through waves of that. That definitely didn't come back for a while after that. But I think talking on that as well, not that particular thing, but I think combining not being able to cook your own food, but then combining that with the social norm and the gender, not gender, sorry, just the particular notion of what a satisfying meal is will be different between two sets of subsets of people. One is the where they listen to the insides, and then two is when they listen only when they can actually really feel something. So what I mean by that is you got people that normally stay in shape, and this is proper not even research based, but I think it probably can be backed by research, is that you got the people that will stop when they feel full, and they will, doesn't matter what's on their plate, it doesn't matter if they've done it, it matters that on the inside that they're full and they're content, and that's what they got their meal for. Then you've got most of the Asian population, which is they will eat, and Emily,
Eat.
fucking hell. Fucking hell.
Okay.
Emma from now on. Forget Emily, it's Emma.
Emily's dead.
No, not. I probably need to explain who Emma is at some point. Then, don't I? But anyway,
Remember me to never get to bed with you.
yeah.
That's
All of that mindful eating was worth nothing taking you out for dinner, was it? The people that will stop when they're absolutely stuffed, and their enjoyment of food comes by the feeling of being stuffed, and that becomes then the two paradigms together, the combination of not cooking your own food, seeing whatever's in front of you by your mum and dad, and then eating till you've absolutely stuffed is the recipe for disaster for culinary day to day with calories. I'm part of that condition too, where for years and years and years it was like you're not leaving, or you're not having dessert, or you're not leaving the table until you finish that whole plate. And you look back on that and you're like, fuck, that still plays out today. Like, I can challenge you to 100 people that listen to this, especially the Trinis in Trinidad and Tobago, is that if you eat 60% of your meal and just stop, and you just stay, and you just put your knife and fork down, you'll feel things happening in your brain that will go stuff like, you might as well finish it, you paid for it, or why aren't you finishing your plate? You got to finish your plate. Or you start hearing these voices in your head that are your conditioning that say, wait a minute, you're not honoring what you normally do, you're not honoring your own conditioning. And that will tell you whether or not you're part of that crew. Like, I was part of that crew for years and years and years, and still probably am sometimes when I'm like, I want to quote unquote enjoy a meal. I will find it really hard to stop eating the whole meal, because my enjoyment is wrapped up in A, getting your money's worth, B, enjoying as much of it as possible, and C, seeing how much you could eat of it as well, because you don't want things to go wasted. If you have those conditions where you're like, I don't want food to be wasted, I want to get money's worth, but then also you're relying on other people's conditioning to put that food in front of you, that becomes a fuckery, because you can't stop when you're actually full, which means that you can't honor your own calorie signaling of fullness and hunger. You're eating off someone else's terms, and then you combine them together, and you're never going to be able to stop when you actually want to stop, or your body says stop. So then you are going to have to use methods of tracking. You are going to have to use portion sizes. You are going to have to make different choices, because you can't eat the same things and stop when you actually should do, as opposed to when you do normally.
Yeah, I call it Asian guilt as well, to a large extent. The reason I say this because
I'm going to write that down. I'm going to write a post about that, Asian guilt. That's a good one.
Basically, a lot of people who go through this situation where, let's say if you come from Africa, a lot like me, your parent will always tell you, hey, people in Africa don't get this food, go finish this.
Hey, they told me that.
Yeah. So you end up getting that, and then you're like, I better finish this, don't I? Because no one else is getting it. So you kind of, and I don't know why I call it Asian guilt, but you can call it whatever guilt it is, right? But it's one of those situations I've seen it happen to numerous amount. Like I remember even in like high school, everyone would be like, oh, you got to finish that, because they would say the same thing and be like, oh, of course, it's not just my mom telling me this, like every other Asian parent telling you the same thing at the same time. But yeah, do you know who was really good at this in terms of like managing the plate really well? And I remember this like vividly. It was Adam Haley.
Yeah.
Adam
Yeah.
is really, really good at this. Like I remember being in Vegas with him, and he was like, he never finishes food at all. Like to be honest, he would eat a bit, like he'd have maybe 2, 3 bites, 4 bites, and he'd be like, he'll just like stop for a bit, and then he'll just start like having a bit of drinks, and then the waitress would come. You done? Yeah, I'm done. That's it. He wouldn't even say I'm done. He would just be like, yeah, I'm done. You can take it away. And he was really, really good at that. And I remember like being there, and then I think I said to him, "How are you staying in shape, man? Like, we've been drinking like crazy, all that kind of stuff." He goes, "I'm just not having all my food." Like simple as that. Like it was literally, he just was like, I'm full when I need to be. Like, the weather's super hot. It's all good. And it was funny because two Asians, me and Akash, then were finishing all our food. Where literally we're like, we're in Vegas, it's this much, whatever, just finish it. So you could see that, like it was what Nathan said is actually like practical examples I've seen myself as well. And you've probably seen it, Nate, with Adam even to this day.
Yeah, I went for dinner. I was with him on Saturday because we were out in Dubai together, and he said something very profound that I fucking love. We were over dinner and we're speaking about he should not be named, about how he just used to finish his food and like he's a prick. But is that when Adam said something like, "I paid to be full, not to eat all of the food." He said this on Saturday, right? He said, "I paid to remove my hunger." And I thought that was a very interesting way to look at food, because that's how he does it, right? Like he's the type of guy that can eat any type of shit food. Like he eats the worst diet ever, but
Yeah.
he stays in shape because he only eats the bit that he needs to be full, and then just doesn't eat the rest of it. So like we go to the Shake Shack and we have like these they're called cement desserts, which are basically frozen custard. Unbelievable. I get the larger one, he gets a small one. He finishes half the small one and leaves the rest. I finish the large one and finish the rest of his. And it's because and he says the same thing. He's like, I paid to be full with the food that I enjoy. So, he stopped when he was full. He doesn't have a big appetite anyway, which is helpful. But I don't think he doesn't have a big appetite. I think he's just more in tune with his appetite compared to everybody else, where he'll get a signaling and it'll be like, oh, I'm full. So then he'll just put it down and then get on with something else.
And also,
he paid to be full.
Yeah, he's also had loads of digestive issues as well, right? So we add that into it. He has to be more in tune with his digestion. Because I remember even like when in Vegas, was like, I may need to go to the toilet soon, whatever. Like he was always in tune with that. He's like, if I have more of this, I'm gonna get messed up here. Whereas the rest of the population, most people don't have that too much, right? To a large extent, unless you really, really are aware of like what's going on in digestion. But it has to take you to
forced conditioning.
Yeah.
That's another forced conditioning.
Yeah. So
which has paved the way now. So his misery gave him something.
Yeah.
The ability to stay in shape.
Yeah, his misery got him in shape.
Yeah, misery or like negatives will always be some type of driver for positive change, if you want to call it that. I don't think it always stays like that. I don't think misery can always be the staple for consistent change. But I think for the most part, he started doing that when he had those issues. But like that mantra just gets me every single time. It's like, I paid to be full. I didn't pay for a full plate of food. If they want to put that on my plate, that's absolutely fine. But I'm responsible for, well, you're responsible for two things with food. And you can control all of these variables, by the way, which is you control what goes from the menu or wherever onto your plate, and then you control what goes from the plate into your mouth. Don't get it twisted. You control both of those by your choices, where you eat, what you choose on the menu, and then equally when it comes on your plate right in front of you, you still have that obligation to control between what goes through the plate and in your mouth. But that part there comes through listening to yourself, not just honoring the Asian guilt.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, to be honest, because he said that to me in 2018, and you just literally had like it's 2021. He still has the same mantra, which is cool to see. And I think if let's say most of the world adopted a similar mentality, they'll be still in shape to a large extent. I mean, the ones who like you've seen it all with models as well, right? Like the ones they have the worst diet possible, thinking how they like. I've seen with dancers actually as well. Maybe because of activity, whatever, but they have that some of the worst diets, but they're like they don't finish all their foods at all. They literally just like, I've had a couple of chips, I'm good to go now. Maybe it's just the taste. It's like I've had that taste now. I don't need it more. It's one of those situations. But I think it'll be interesting. Let's see how many people like practice that going forward. In the next, if we have more clients that are, oh, you know what, I tried that out. I'm not gonna. I'll just be very conscious of what I'm eating. May not try and finish it all. Let's see what happens. Historically, I mean, I think with Asians of 100%, it's like that. Like I said, the Asian guilt starting from like, whereas even if you're from India or whatever, you're still going to get some sort of like guilt of like, some people don't get this, you should make the most of this, and you should eat all of it in your plate, and so on. Which I get to a large extent, because even Emily I think Emily, you said you went through the same thing, right?
Yeah, man. I had two brothers, and my dad, he would put like, I kid you not, the mountain of pasta bolognese I ate on the weekends, and then a whole pizza. Like I was a girl, probably like 7 years old, and I would eat a whole pizza. So that, yeah, like, and you finish or you do this, it's always been there. So
maybe it's also a cost as well, right? Like it's just a whole like, I pay for this, you better finish this kind of thing.
maybe.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking of the show Everybody Hates Chris. Do you remember that show? Anyone watch that show? Nate, do you watch it? No. It's about Chris Rock's life, and the dad was like ultra like money oriented, so he would always be like, "This cost $3. Like you better finish." Or it just reminded me of that straight away. I'll try and send you a clip of it later, but yeah, it just reminds you of that now. But let's see if there is some sort of change coming up to this. But the biggest takeaway I've seen in like over the last 5 years is more and more Asians are like, especially guys, they are now taking control of what they want to consume. Because literally I've had like 3-4 inquiries like yesterday. A lot of them were like, "Oh, I've never cooked, I've never done this, I'm busy." And then as soon as you kind of say, "Okay, what are you willing to cook?" They're still like, "Oh yeah, I can still have this." The start to them is mainly like, I can have like, the frozen stuff, and then I can put it in here, and then that's just the usual start for most people. Yeah. And then after that, it's like, opens up the avenue to essentially you can cook whatever you want. So it just takes time, and I think it just forces you to be curious within your own palate as well, which I think is also very important.
Yeah, if you start with the frozen veggies that I still have here, which is the cut up carrots, sweet corn, and peas, which is generally the staple of anyone that starts a diet who's never cooked before. It's like a starter pack, isn't it? One of those, a frying pan, some chicken breast, and then some seasoning from that aisle. That's generally the starting point for most, and that's okay to have a starting point. And if you want to continue that way and you like that food, the problem is that most people that have come from that Asian background have had very, very rich tasting food before, so that when they go to this, they think this is fucking wank, and then they start making choices based off, oh, this isn't fulfilling me, not filling, but fulfilling me the way that the other food did. It was rich before. I had this tasting stuff. It was beautiful. It had ghee in it. It had roti. It was like the sauce was amazing, whatever it was. Yeah. But then at the same time, then they start with this diet starts Monday starter pack, where they are prepared to cook on their own. It still becomes a difficult transition, but you have to realize that's the starting point, like, and then you move on from there, and then you learn how to make sauces yourself, and like you learn how to use seasonings appropriately, and then the implements that you use. Like, if anyone's listening to this that doesn't know how to cook, get a fucking air fryer. It takes 10 minutes in the air fryer to cook whatever you want. Like, literally, you could put a raw chicken breast with a chopped tin of tomatoes, with peppers, onions, whatever, chili powder, chilies themselves, veggies in there, and put it on for 10 minutes, and it will cook up a absolute storm. And that's just the implement that you want to utilize as well. Like it's all about those specific changes. But like you said, it'd be very interesting to see how many people do adopt this philosophy and how many people stay with the conditioning. Because if we're being really honest, you look at the life cycle of someone trying to stay in shape, and you look at the ages from 40 to 80, most people aren't going to track food for more than 5 years. Like, people will not want to track food for 5 years. So then here's the question: how do you know how much food you should eat? And the only real way to work with this is by listening to yourself as opposed to your conditioning. That's the only way, because you could eat the same portion sizes of the same food for the next 25 years of your life, but that's one method. When you get a fat, let's say for example you learn how to cook as a male who's never cooked before, like a South Asian dude,
that and you do that's never cooked before. You go and cook for the first time, it works for a year, then you get a family, then you don't cook then, or you then pass off those responsibilities back to someone else, and that's fine. The gender roles, if you want to go down that route, is there, and if they want to optimize them, they can do. And if you want to cook your have your mum's food or your wife's food, that's great, but you need to know how to stop, when to stop, and how much is enough. And the only way that you understand that is by learning what your body is telling you on the inside. Like, I'm not a massive intuitive eating person or person that says that people should go from that from the beginning. But when you go through a life cycle of coaching, or you go through the element of like learning how to structure your meals, what to get from the supermarket, how to cook some decent food, tracking so that you know what food is in terms of calories. After you've done that, the only alternative is that you continue tracking for the rest of your life and eat the same very, very similar foods, or you learn how to combine that with how much listening to yourself and going, I don't need any more, so I'm going to stop. That's how you eat your favorite food and still stay in shape. That's the holy grail. Because if you get a Big Mac and chips and you don't track it and you just eat liberally like you're supposed to, you're either doing one or two things. You're finger crossing, hoping that you don't go over your calories, or you actually listen to the inside and say, actually, when you've ate 3/4 of that burger and you've had a few chips, you're done, you're full, honor that, and then you'll stay in shape for life.
Yeah, I call it the Adam Haley solution. Honestly, like it is that, and I coined it to them because he's the first person I've seen it like do it properly. When I say properly, he's done it over a consistent amount of time, and he's obviously, like I said, he's always stayed in shape to a large level, despite him having like a horrible diet. So it can be done. It's just like, if you do ever transition back to, let's say, old habits, which we don't want, but if you do, always remember the Adam Haley solution, because that can actually help you probably stop you from gaining extra 5 kilos potentially, or 10 kilos. So something you want to take away. But we'll be back next week, potentially, maybe part 3, who knows? But we'll be back again. And apart from that, guys, share this with friends and family, especially this episode, because I think it'll be really relevant to a lot of people out there. So go, share it up. And if you have any questions for us, feel free to,
Whilst we're on the topic of gender roles and still on this podcast, Emily, get back to the kitchen.
Peace.